this morning is to pray or not to pray. And I guess you deduce that I'm going to talk about prayer. Big surprise. I'm going to talk about prayer in a different way this morning than some of you may have ever heard. And before I get into the meat of all of this, I would like to say to you that when I come before you, I'm talking out of my own experience and what I have come to believe and know within myself. I do not ask that you accept that wholesale. I do not ask that you accept that face value. What I do ask of you is that you keep an open mind, that you accept what I'm saying in the sense that you're willing to consider it and process it through you. If it makes sense to you, fine. If it doesn't, discard it. Because we are all individuals on our own path to find what is divine for us and where our God exists for us and what that looks like. So, having said that, we have prayer. And prayer is something that is universally known. And it reminds me of two young boys who were spending the night at their grandparents' the week before Christmas. At bedtime, the two boys knelt beside their beds to say their prayers when the youngest one began praying at the top of his lungs. I pray for a new bicycle. I pray for a new Nintendo. I pray for a new VCR. Now his older brother leaned over and nudged the little boy, and he said, "Why are you shouting your prayers? God is not deaf." To which the little boy replied, "No, but Grandma is." So, I don't know if that's how some of us have prayed. But first I want to talk a little bit about God. Where is God? What is God? Is there a God? What are we in relation to God? And does any of this matter? So, I will tell you what my concept of God is, and you can take it for what it's worth. You can call it anything you want. God, the deity, first cause. There was a minister I knew who called it Big Joe. It does not matter what we call it. It matters what we interpret it to be or see it as being. My God is pretty big. Pretty big. We are told in most major religions that God is everywhere present, all-knowing, and all-powerful. If that is true, we've got to think about the ramifications of that. Everywhere present, all-knowing, and all-powerful. To me, that means nothing else can exist. That God is everywhere present in what we can see, feel, and touch, and smell, and whatever, and what we cannot. So God is everything. It is the power and intelligence which created everything in the cosmos. If there was nothing and then there was something, which happens all the time, by the way, what can it be created, what can the matter world that we see, the physical world that we see, be created out of, except God's stuff? Something to think about. The man who founded the discipline to which I belong, Ernest Holmes, wrote a book called This Thing Called Life. And in it he says, there is a universal wholeness seeking expression through everything. We are calling it simply life. Another word. The religionist calls it God. The philosopher calls it reality. Life is infinite energy coupled with limitless creative imagination. It is the invisible essence and substance of every visible form. Its nature is goodness, truth, wisdom, and beauty, as well as energy and imagination. Our highest satisfaction comes from a sense of conscious union with this invisible life. And he also said we shall never encompass God, yet we shall also be in and of God. So, God is pretty big. All-powerful, all-knowing. The significance of this for me is important because that means that I am created out of the same God stuff. And if the nature of God is creative, and of course the Bible tells us we're born in the image of God, which doesn't mean I look like God. God forbid. That God looks like me. It means that I have the nature of that same being, of that same infinite beingness. That means that I too am beauty and wisdom and truth and peace And where's this power thing? Well, I believe that consciousness is power. That what we know within ourselves, the preponderance of our thought, our deeply seated beliefs, are the material of our lives because of this creative power with which we are co-creative through choice and decision and our thought. So, Ernest Holmes went on in this thing called life to say, God is pure spirit, filling all space. God has been called by 1,000 names, but you and I this morning are to think of God as life, the presence and power in everything, which makes everything what it is. Let us use the word life to symbolize everything God means to us, just the simple word life. I grew up calling God nature, because at some point I discarded conventional religion, and I didn't discard God, so God is nature, which is the nature of being, which is suitable, I guess. He went on again to say, the divine spirit is not a mythical, abstract being living somewhere above the earth. What a relief. God is a divine presence, revealing itself to everyone who believes. Where God is recognized, there is life. Where the presence of God is realized, there is action. Where the goodness of God is acknowledged, there is peace. Which leads me into prayer. And prayer. I'll get into the science of it, but what is prayer? I don't believe that we pray in order to petition or change God's will, or to supplicate before something outside of ourselves. I believe that prayer is rather to bring ourselves into harmony with the eternal and infinite stuff of ourselves, that infinite presence. We may not be the allness of God, but we may be the eachness. Individual expressions. God expresses as a rock, as the sky, as trees, as the air I breathe, as the cosmos and the stars that I see, and as me. That's my belief. A fellow by the name of Søren Kierkegaard, you may have heard of him, he's a Danish philosopher, theologian, and cultural critic who was a major influence on existentialism and the Protestant theology in the 20th century. He said prayer does not change God, but it changes he who prays. It changes him who prays. And current science has something very interesting to say about prayer and meditation. Scientists are making attempts now to understand spiritual experience and what happens in the brains and bodies of people who believe that they can connect with the divine through prayer and meditation. There's a field, there's a name for this field, and the field is now called neurotheology. And although it's relatively new, it's drawing prominent scientists and researchers in the US and Canada. Scientists have found that the brains of people who spend untold hours in prayer are different. And there was an article written in 2010 by a researcher and a doctor and scientific researcher named Michael Formica. In this article, he wrote, prayer is not just a going out, but also a going in, and it is a practice woven deeply into the fabric of global culture. A rich tapestry of science, philosophy, and metaphysics, and of course, faith and spiritual sojourn. The article goes on to say, as a practice, prayer is the setting of an intention. It is not a petition, but a resolution, and the resolution takes many forms. Whatever that form, the psychology that underlies prayer issues forth in two fairly distinct perspectives. On the one hand, God may be represented as an external construct of the ego, or something out there. On the other, God may be represented as an interior archetype, or something in here. That is my belief. I think it's both out there and in here. So it's everything. Major Western traditions such as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam subscribe large measure to the out there construct. And so God is primarily prayed to. Both the mystical traditions associated with each of these larger traditions, Gnosticism, the Kabbalah, and Sufism, as well as the major Eastern religions such as Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism, they issue forth from the other side of the coin, subscribing in large measure to the in-here construct. Okay. From this perspective, it is something more introspective and akin to meditation. What's more, it's been found out that prayer, like meditation, influences our state of mind, which in turn influences our state of body. That's no longer, the mind-body connection is no longer a new thing to us. We've heard about that. It reduces the experience of anxiety, elevates a depressed mood, lowers blood pressure, stabilizes sleep patterns, and impacts autonomic functions like digestion and breathing. Further, in influencing our state of body-mind, prayer and meditation also influences our thinking. This prompts a shift in the habits of mind and subsequently patterns of behavior. These changes in turn and over time induce changes in the brain, influencing further our subjective and objective experience of the world and how we participate in the world. And finally, and this is scientific language, so forgive me, the exterior expression of that interior transformation extends the intention of transformation outward, with prayer providing in part or quite literally the vehicle, to paraphrase Mahatma Gandhi, for being the change you want to see in the world. Prayer can be that instrument. Our thoughts are very powerful. What we think and believe, backed with feeling, is true, becomes the tapestry of our lives. If you look around at what you believe, you say, of course I believe it. This is true, and this is true, and this is true. But we are all individuals with different beliefs, some of them conflicting. So how can something be true for you and something different be true for me, and both of us have that experience? Where does that power lie? Something to think about. When they become deeply seated as beliefs and evoke feelings, thoughts are very, very, very powerful. An interesting exercise would be for us to identify our beliefs and see how many of them do hold true in our lives. I would say probably all of them. I dare say, and yet we do not hold all of the same beliefs and about the same things. So consider for a moment, if our thoughts become things, in other words, if our consciousness becomes our experience, then perhaps prayer is a mechanism for shifting that consciousness. And that is my belief. I believe that we do not pray to something outside of ourselves. We pray to change ourselves to be in tune with the divine within ourselves. And I'm going to share with you my prescription for prayer as I've been taught. And I'll tell you that I've seen amazing things as a result of this prayer. I've seen a 35-year-old woman diagnosed with terminal cancer have her tumors disappear. I've seen an ideal relationship manifest for someone with a treacherous history of relationships. And much, much more. I was taught 5 steps of prayer. We didn't even call it prayer to distinguish it from the supplicative kind of thing and the petitioning. We called it a spiritually mind treatment, which sounds awfully clinical, but it goes like this. Step 1, recognition. I recognize that God is everything, everywhere. I recognize that God's nature is peace, harmony, love, wisdom. I realize abundance. There's 5 quintillion insects on the planet. There's no lack of abundance. So, the second step, which is easy if I really get the first step, is unification, it's called. And that is that I, then, am spirit and form. And I am co-creative with the infinite because I can choose, and I can believe, and I can feel, and I can know, and that feeling and knowing within me creates a chain of events that construct the thing in my world. Something to consider. The third step then, once I get those steps really clear within myself, would be realization. And realization is where I get fairly specific without outlining how it needs to come to me, because how is not my business. Because God does work in wonderful ways. I mean, I have seen lots of things. But I realize then that if prosperity is natural, and because infinity doesn't know time, I always affirm in this now moment, because prosperity is everywhere, that I too am I see abundance everywhere. I too have abundance in my life. I have abundance in money. I have abundance in friends. I have abundance in supply within my life, as well as love. I have abundance. I have abundance in everything. And I know this is so right now. Then, once I realize whatever I want to realize in that step, I move to thanksgiving. We never give thanks for a gift not given. So, I'm giving thanks that I know that there's a law of cause and effect that works. I'm giving thanks that I can know this in this moment. I'm giving thanks for the manifestation of this that's happening now in the universal mind and in the world around me. And then step 5, which is often the hardest step, is release. That's the keep your grubby mitts off the face. I let it go because I know that it's working. And I know that that is happening. And I know that that's my reality. And I can move forward and go forth, and so it is. That is my prescription for prayer. I am going to give you an example by doing a prayer for me right now. I am going to pray for, I'll do a prayer for abundance. I know right now that God is all there is. And that abundance is everywhere I see. And I know that I have the principle of supply within me. And so, I know also that my word is power. And so I speak my word with power right now. And I know that within myself and in my world, there is abundance and prosperity everywhere. And money is a symbol of value that's also in my world. And I know that right now, generous amounts of money flow to me. I'm a magnet for money. I'm a magnet for good. And it comes to me easily and well. And I use it well and share what I have with others. And do good works with it, as well as take care of my own needs. I am grateful for this. I know that it is so. And so I am very thankful to know this, that it is manifesting. And I can go forth with thanksgiving and a positive expectancy, and I do so now. And my release step is, and so it is done, amen. By the way, and amen means this is so. So it's just another way of saying amen. Now, I said to pray or not to pray, and I thought about how Hamlet might say this. He might say to pray or not to pray. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take up invocation against a sea of troubles, and by praying end them. So, a man by the name of Henry Van Dyke wrote this. He said, I hold it true that thoughts are things. They're endowed with bodies and breath and wings, and that we send them forth to fill that which we call our secret thought. The world with good results or ill, that which we call our secret thoughts, moves forth to earth's remotest spot, leaving its blessing or its woes like tracks behind as it goes. We build our fortune thought by thought, for good or ill, yet know it not. Yet so the universe was wrought. This is another name for fate. Choose then thy destiny and wait, for love brings love and hate brings hate. And so, I'm sure that I conveyed to you by now that I seriously recommend prayer for you. And it doesn't really matter the words we use. There are people who pray in a conventional way to the God out there, and their prayer works. Why does some prayer work and some prayer not? It is the belief of the believer. If you remember the biblical story, there's a Bible story when Jesus was walking through Jerusalem, a woman who was ill came and just managed to touch the hem of his garment. And he looked down at her, and he simply said to her, "By your faith are ye healed." He also said, "It is done unto us as we believe." Interesting. So, I don't recommend it as a supplication or petition in hopes of a response. I do recommend that you cultivate a faith in something greater than yourselves that responds to you, because it's closer than hands and nearer than breathing. I recommend prayer as a means of communion with your divine self and the infinite power of the universe. And this Lenten season, while we don't have any practices, I don't have any usual religious practices around Lent, I would like to share with you a poem which I think you will find meaningful to you. Since the season of Lent is about fasting and feasting, the poem is called simply Fasting and Feasting. And it's adapted from a man who wrote, called William Arthur Ward. He was an American author, teacher, and pastor who lived from 1921 to 1994. I fast from judging others. I feast on beholding the divine in them. I fast from an emphasis on differences. I feast on the oneness of all life. I fast from apparent darkness. I feast on the reality of light. I fast from words that pollute. I feast on phrases that purify. I fast from anger, and I feast on patience. I fast from pessimism. I feast on optimism. I fast from worry. I feast on divine order. I fast from complaining, and I feast on appreciation. I fast from negatives. I feast on affirmatives. I fast from hostility, and I feast on non-resistance. I fast from bitterness, and I feast on forgiveness. I fast from self-concern, and I feast on compassion for others. I fast from anxiety, and I feast on eternal truth. I fast from discouragement, I feast on hope. I fast from facts that depress. I feast on thoughts that uplift. I fast from suspicion, and I feast on truth. I fast from shadows of sorrow, and I feast on the serenity of silence. I fast from powers that overwhelm.